Welcome to the broadcast, everybody. I hope you're well. It's delightful to see you. We are going to romp our way through the royal tidbits and morsels of the day, because why not? What a fabulous word, isn't it? Romp. We're going to romp our way through it all. And then towards the end, something slightly different, because I get a lot of comments and questions about my skincare routine. So I'm going to indulge some of those questions towards the end of the broadcast. Something a little different. But very exciting news to hear that the Spice Girls may be reforming as a fivesome for the coronation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that rumour's true? That's what's doing the rounds, that they're trying to be lured into proceedings during the coronation to perform together. I'm sure that'll horrify some of you. And it's not really in keeping with the orchestral theme of the King's concert to be held at Windsor Castle, is it? But they did such a fabulous job at the 2012 closing ceremony at the Olympics, didn't they? Do you remember? It was such a fabulous job they did, full of nostalgia and good feeling and general pop fun. So who better to unite the kingdom than a little bit of so-called girl power? We shall see. But I'm excited. His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness Anne, Princess Royal, attended church this morning. It was very reassuring to see them looking so dignified and so regal in browns and tans. The King was toting a marvellous-looking umbrella, and the Princess Royal was snug and warm-looking in her tea-cosy hat affair. K.C. Enza had some curious comments. She says that, "I've said it before and I will say it again. Meghan isn't in hiding. She is planning to travel to the coronation and is busy writing with her ghostwriter her book, which she will release after the coronation, I believe." I don't think it's coming that quickly, my dear. I don't think it's, but you never know. When you don't see or hear from Meghan, she is just busy. No one has heard if Harry or his ridiculous wife will be invited. I have heard Harry has been offered a lot of money to comment about the coronation as it proceeds on our American channels, CBS, NBC, ABC, etc. We shall see. Must comment about the fabulous black chiffon attire you are wearing. Wonderful on you. Thank you, my dear. The rumour mill is suggesting that the King wants Harry at the coronation. Never forget, first and foremost, he is guided by his relationship to God. He prays daily. We even hear this from Harry. Just like the Queen, he turns to God first and foremost for succour. And he also turns to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Love him or loathe him. He turns to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the rumours are that he's been in dialogue and communication with the Archbishop for quite some time about this matter, turning to him for advice and a sort of brokerage, if you will, brokering a sort of deal between the royal family and Prince Harry. It is said that the resistance is coming from William, that William is reluctant to extend an olive branch quite so readily, which is entirely understandable. The thing is, you see, my dear, that the Harkles have played a blinder in one respect. I mean, you can see it from all kinds of angles, but they've played a blinder in one respect with regards to the coronation, because the timing and the build-up of all their merchandising has come to this recent crescendo as the coronation era is about to commence. So they're very much the hot topic. And the concern is that the Duke of Sussex's absence from the coronation would be of greater concern than his attendance. You know, even if they're not there, and we all ignore the fact and delight and rejoice in the fact that they're not at the coronation, of course the press are going to have a field day with it, whether they attend or they don't attend. Reports have been emerging that Harry is giving consideration to various networks in America to add his voice to their coverage of the coronation. Now, I do not know how reliable these reports are. I don't think that this is the type of thing that Archewell would want to get involved with, but if they are not at the coronation for whatever reason, and the filthy lucre is lucrative enough, because we could be talking further tens of millions or enough to keep their security around the casa in good order for a year or two. If that money talks, well, you wouldn't put it past them, would you? Especially if it means they can cozy up to all their news anchor pals and cronies, doesn't it? You know, the Gayle Kings and this, that and the fourth. Samantha Markle appeared on Tucker Carlson over the weekend, accusing Meghan of telling porky pies to Harry when she was courting him, and moreover the royal family. Half-truths, such as her stint at the Argentinian embassy, you know, and she kicked off her stint as Eva Peron, and she's found herself on the Rainbow Tour in recent years when it all started. Don't cry for me, Argentina. It all started back at the embassy, didn't it? When she took to the motorcade, waving to her descomisados, when she was invited there to work. Well, no. As we all know, and as Samantha Markle tells us, it was not a job of any kind. It was a 5-week work experience stint. Or I should say a 5-week study programme paid for by her father, Thomas Markle Sr., under the auspices of Uncle Mike, who worked for the embassy, had connections there, and drafted her a letter of recommendation. She was recommended, and that's why she got the stint. But Uncle Mike hadn't even seen her since she was a baby. Hadn't even seen her for all those years. But he still wrote the recommendation letter. She got this work experience gig. And Samantha says she didn't get grants and scholarships, as she seems to have intimated. And Samantha reminds us that it wasn't just Harry and the royal family that she might have spun these yarns to. It was also Rachel Ray and Craig Ferguson on live TV. You know, she never puts these things in context. And Samantha says that that is why Meghan always wanted to keep her family members away from the royal family. Well, it was interesting to hear her spin on that and her opinion. I'm sure there are parts of it I agree with and other parts of it I would question, because I'm sure there were several reasons why she wanted to keep that part of the family away from the royal family. But I certainly take what she says on board. Their Majesties met with survivors of Nazi concentration camps and genocide at Buckingham Palace, and they lit candles to remember those who suffered. It was a very moving occasion during this Holocaust Memorial Day. And they met with Dr. Martin Stern, who was taken to camps during the Second World War as a young boy. The King also visited the Africa Centre at new premises in Southwark, providing home from home for Africans in the United Kingdom to connect, champion and celebrate African culture. Red Rose Witch said about Charles and Camilla, "Sadly, I wasn't able to see their Majesties here in the Northwest, but it's wonderful to know that as our Duke and Duchess of Lancaster, they've blessed the Red Rose County with a visit. Very nice, my dear, but I'm sorry you didn't get to see them. They'll be coming again, I'm sure, so you'll get your turn." But I thought it was interesting to mention this because it is a quirk of the Duchy of Lancaster that people aren't aware of. You see, the monarch is always the Duke of Lancaster, whether they are male or female. It's a quirk of the Duchy of Lancaster, and therefore there is no Duchess of Lancaster. Once upon a time there was, I believe there was a Blanche and there was a Constance. But at the time of Victoria, it was actually Victoria that decided she believed that a Duchess should always be in reference to the spouse of a Duke. And as she, as monarch, was not the spouse of a Duke, she decided that she would be known as the Duke of Lancaster, and that was a tradition that remained throughout Elizabeth's reign. She was the Duke of Lancaster, and so there was no Duchess. And so the current Duke of Lancaster, of course, is Charles. But Camilla, although she is a Duchess, she is Duchess of Edinburgh, because Charles is also Duke of Edinburgh. You know, all these titles. Gets very confusing, doesn't it? But he, of course, inherited that title. And he may bestow it upon Edward in future. He may not. That is their business. But, yes, so I thought it was just worth mentioning that little quirk of the Duchy of Lancaster. The Princess Royal is Colonel-in-Chief of several British Army units currently serving in Estonia, who greeted her on arrival. And after she took a tour inside the Challenger 2 main battle tank, she also had the pleasure of meeting with the French and Danish troops deployed as part of the multinational battle group, and also attended a dinner hosted by His Excellency Mr. Caris. And to finish off, something a little bit different today. As I mentioned earlier, I get a lot of questions asking about my skin regime and skincare, such as this one from Kim Cat. River, you have such beautiful skin. Thank you, dear. Will you please tell us your skincare routine? Well, I'm going to share what I can, but it will disappoint those of you who ask what products I use, that kind of detail, because I'm not going to share any skincare brands that I use, and I have reasons for that. I'm also wanting to caveat this by saying I can only speak for my skin. I'm not recommending anything as such. Do you understand? I don't like to recommend, because it's so personal for everybody. Everybody's skin is so different. You know, it's the largest organ in the body. It responds and reacts or doesn't differently from person to person, you know, within the same family, let alone any other kind of demographic. So I can only really speak for my skin. And I take your compliment and I thank you very much for it. But just as anybody else, my skin is far from perfect, and I get all the usual breakouts that anybody does, congestion, wrinkles, anything that is normal and usual I get in spades. So I'm certainly not putting myself forward as some exemplar of pristine skin, but I have learned certain tips and tricks through the way. My skin is very reactive and quite sensitive, and as well as the odd breakout, which I've managed to calm over the last few years for sure. It can also be quite red. There's a lot of red on one side of my family, and although my immediate family aren't redheads, there's a gene somewhere there, 'cause some of my cousins are ferociously ginger. Ferociously ginger. So there is some of that in my skin chemistry, and it can flare up. But the reason I'm not going to tell you the actual brands I'm using is because I think people need to discover them for themselves through experimentation. But I will give some advice on choosing brands that you use. The other reason is that I'm afraid that I know with the significant amount of views that I get and the comments that you leave me that I have quite a lot of power as an influencer. And I don't really want to give one specific brand tens and thousands of new customers without commission, my dear. So I'm not plugging brands, you know, I don't work for shekels. So there are a few reasons why I'm not going to name the brand that I use. And I actually have narrowed it down to one brand. Over the last couple of years, I have whittled my skincare down to one brand. And I've learnt to really trust it. And that is what that would be, when I'm using the word recommendations, it's just conversationally. I'm not actually recommending. I hope you understand. I'm just holding forth on the topic. Do as you will. But I would recommend finding one brand that works in harmony with itself and that is manufactured by a dermatologist that has the influence of a dermatologist, a well-respected one that isn't all froth and bubble, that isn't all gift of the gab with no scientific knowledge. I would recommend products, no fragrance. You know, it's all about the ingredients. It shouldn't be about the packaging. There's a lot of luxury skincare out there which includes fragrance and extraneous ingredients. It shouldn't have anything extra in it that isn't required to make your skin as great as it can be. So I'd be wary of some of those. Well, most brands, to be quite honest. You want simple, elegant formulas that are researched and perhaps headed by a dermatologist of great repute. And so I use 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different products, 5 or 6 products by the same brand that is trusted, and they all work in harmony with each other. And the cleanser that I use has a sort of gel formulation to it. And it was a real tonic to discover, because as I was growing up through my teenage years and when I was very reactionary and getting blemishes, well, I made so many mistakes, but one of the mistakes I made was using hot water and cold water, the extremes. You know, you can splash on cold water to shut your pores and use hot water with a flannel or a cloth to sort of open them up. And that was all such a mistake which I regret bitterly. The only water that goes on my face, even if I'm standing in the shower, I will avoid it now and only let it run over my scalp. The only water that I will splash my face with is freshly coming out of the faucet, and I'll splash it on, and it'll be tepid, more towards the cool side of tepid than the warm. You don't want any heat going on your face ever. And I'm speaking to those who will have skin like mine. Well, I'm just telling you what I do. You know, no hot water on the face, because it will set off various reactions, some of which may take days to erupt or for you to see the evidence of this heat that you're applying to your face. Basically, you don't want to shock your skin. You want it to remain room temperature. So room temperature water is the best kind of water to use. And it takes a while to get used to, because you don't get that blissful feeling of, you know, very warm to hot water splashing it on your face at certain times, which is comforting, and you don't get that bracing feeling of chucking on or splashing on cold water either. So it takes a while to get used to, because you're used to having that sort of comfort. But once you're used to it, after a question of months or even years, you don't want to go back, and your skin feels like it's having a good drink. And you need to use a cleanser that you trust, because a lot of the cleansers I used in the past, before I found my holy grail product, I wasn't confident massaging it into the skin, so I would just sort of gloss it over the skin. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't really get in there and around the nose and around the chin and any sort of problematic areas. I would just sort of gloss it over. Whereas this product, because I trust it and I trust the ingredients and I trust that it's not going to leave my face dry and flaky, I have the confidence to take the time to truly massage it into the skin. And if I've been wearing a little bit of makeup on the skin, then I will double cleanse with that gel cleanser. But it is imperative that it's done twice a day. I know that there are ladies and gentlemen out there that might like to fall asleep after a hard night with their makeup intact, but I've got to say, for all the parties that I go to and have been to, and there are lots, my dear, lots of coming home, you know, after the walk of shame, trotting up and dying to just hit the pillow. Well, firstly, I like to shower before I go to bed, so I'll often shower twice a day, and it doesn't matter what state I'm in, I will force myself to have a shower, dip in the shower before bed, and also to wash my face. I'm struggling to remember any time where I would have fallen asleep with makeup on the skin, especially if you suffer with congested skin. You know, some people are just blessed, and I do know some people who will sleep in makeup and have slept in makeup, and it doesn't seem to have any detrimental effect to their skin. So as I say, everybody is different. Joan Collins says that makeup is fabulous for skin. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far, but in her case, that's how she felt about it. And of course, when it comes to makeup itself, I use very little of it, but the stuff you can get now is non-comedogenic and has formulations that takes problem skin into account. So a good foundation isn't something that you really want to skip on. And I always, if I ever do dip into the makeup in everyday life, a bit of tinted moisturizer or a bit of that, this, that and the other, it's a very frugal approach, or what's the word I should use, very minimal approach. because I believe that if you can get the texture of skin as good as you possibly can, then that means you only have to use the slightest bit of makeup. I'm always shocked by how much makeup I see ladies using on YouTube, for example, when they're applying their makeup and showing it off. I mean, it's drag queen proportions as far as I'm concerned. And many of them don't need it. Many of them look like they've got great skin, but they slather it on with a trowel. I mean, I understand it's fun, so if it's for the fun element, I've got nothing against it, but I don't understand why they use quite so much. I do think less is more, especially if you've managed to achieve some sort of radiance with your skin. Now, I used moisturiser from a very young age. Well, I would say sort of 11 or 12, I started dipping into my mother's moisturiser and never stopped. There hasn't been a day since then where I haven't applied it to my skin. And that includes the throat. I remember the throat and all around the top of the chest. And I believe, even though in my earlier days I would have used products that weren't quite so elegant and so finely sourced ingredient-wise, I do believe that just the fact that my skin was kept moisturized, I hesitate to use that awful word, moist, but you know, that my skin has always been moisturized, and I think any harm that things such as fragrances and clogging ingredients might have wreaked over my skin, I think the fact that I kept it moisturized all that time went in my favor anyway. So whether it's day or night, and I will use a serum in the morning and a serum at night. Both of the serums I use have gentle actives, as they're called, very gentle actives. So I'm not into complicated, overbearing, the tretinoins are they called, these very harsh retinoids, yet perhaps one day I might do, but I don't ever want to, I like a very simple, basic regime. That is why I like the brand I use at the moment. It's simple cleanser, a simple moisturizer, then you have the option of an active for the day and an active for the night, active serums, and you can sort of pick and choose when and where you want to use them, because sometimes it's very good. You learn to read the language of your skin when you work with a specific brand and a sort of capsule wardrobe of products. You learn to read when it's necessary, when it's really necessary to apply. And sometimes you can go, and it actually behooves your skin to go for a day, maybe even a day or night without using any actives on your skin, to give it a bit of a breather and let it recharge. You learn to listen to your skin. And what I was going to say, that in my teenage days, I discovered, as well as my mother's moisturizer, I discovered exfoliator. And I've got to say, this was a frenemy of mine. I didn't realize at the time how it was not going to benefit my skin long term. But exfoliator for me, the granular exfoliator you can get and would rub into one's cheekbones or any areas that you wanted to shine. The most fabulous thing, the way that it would make the light bounce off of my cheeks and my skin by rubbing this sort of granular scrub into the cheeks and all over the skin. It looked so great for a night out to use an old school exfoliator. But I realise now in hindsight that it created so many problems the next day, the next week, the next month for my skin, because although I looked divine as a result of that exfoliating, for the next however so long, my skin was objecting wildly to that aggravation. So it's the same as what I told you with using hot water. You want to avoid anything that's going to aggravate the skin or feel like some sort of foreign entity attacking it. And the exfoliators I was using were that. I just didn't really add it up at the time until I came across, I think the products that I use now, the serums that I use, have an exfoliating effect on the skin without scrubbing it. So For me, and what I would suggest is anything you're scrubbing into your skin is an absolute no-no. Can have dramatically good temporary effects, but long-term, not so good. So now I can get the same radiance and the same effect by using products that are gentler and that you don't scrub into your skin. It's also worth me saying here, isn't it, that I have not had any fillers, any filler injections. I think I mentioned recently that sometimes people will suggest I've had stuff pumped into my lips, but it's usually just a bit of extra lip liner. No, it's entirely naturel, my dear. It's entirely naturel. But what I will tell you is that, especially for those of you that are slight of figure like me, you might want to consider eating more to bring some plumpness back to your skin, getting a few more calories in there. And as you may know, at some point in life, one has to choose between one's waist and one's face, and also, along with the face, your behind. You can't have both. It's all very well when you're 14 years old, you can have both. And I don't know about you, but what's more important to me is my face and my derriere. As much as I love my waistline, as much as my waistline is much admired. I love it, but one day I will have to wave goodbye to it because the face and the peach will take a preference. You know, it's a tough battle and it's a close second, but it's the way it goes, my dear. Of course, if you're into lipo, which is something I would never do, then perhaps you can do a Kardashian and get both, but not here, dear. Diet, I believe, is different for everybody, of course, but everything's good in moderation. It's all about moderation, but for me, the big enemy is sugar, and I can go through a pot of ice cream, I mean a large tub of ice cream in one sitting, and I've learned to have a bit more resistance to those kind of temptations over the years, which has certainly helped. They will always result in a flare-up for me, so I try to avoid sugar in large batches as much as I can. Now, as for budget, this is different for everybody. The range that I use is a mid-range brand. It's a mid-range, so it's not like high street budget. I think some people will pay a lot for a brand name and for ingredients that aren't necessary. So some of those luxury brands, maybe not all of them, but some of those very hyper luxury brands are, in my opinion, a con. But I like having clean, clear skin. So I'm happy enough to invest in products that I trust and keep up the sort of regime or routine, as you say. That's what makes sense for me. If you suffer with breakouts or get a pimple, and I know this is so much easier said than done, so much easier, leave it alone. Leave it alone as long as you can, because you're only going to extend the agony and the blemish, sometimes by weeks, if you play around with it. So if you can do, put on a pair of gloves if you have to while you're sitting there to stop yourself from going at it. Try to leave it, but so much easier said than done. The more you play around with your skin and get fingers all over it, the more problems you'll create and the more problems you'll find. So try and do any inspections while you are applying your serum in the morning and perhaps in the evening, and then leave it for the rest of the day. And this is a really important point about skincare. If you don't relax about your skin and relax about your regime, and if you're one of those people that allows that sort of aesthetic concern to overtake your life, you will look, my friend and I used to say, producty. What's that product? And you can see the product on someone's face. And you can see this sort of anxious look of concern about product. It's a lot about attitude. Oftentimes people who are anxious about their skin look anxious and come across rather anxious about it. And actually the number one skincare golden rule that everybody will tell you, every professional in the world, is not a rule that I follow. Okay? So the number one product anybody will tell you to use, the most important thing, especially over the last few years, that's been recommended is SPF of a factor 50. And that should be on the skin at all times, even if you're inside in the house, just with a bit of daylight coming through the window. You should always slather yourself in SPF. That's the golden rule. Well, I don't follow it. I don't use it. And there's just one reason for it. Apart from the fact that it's actually very expensive to use if you're using a good brand, and the brand that I follow do offer a good SPF, which I have tried and I have experimented with. But for one thing, if you're using it properly, as instructed, then you have to put on about 3 teaspoonfuls of SPF to the face and another 3 teaspoonfuls to the neck. And aside from the fact that it is so much product, expensive to keep up, and any other issue, I just don't enjoy it. I hate wearing SPF, and I've experimented, as I say, with that brand and some other really good brands which have got a reputation for being fairly light. I do not like SPF. I don't like the feeling of it. It feels greasy on my skin. I don't use any makeup with it, and so I'm sure that I may suffer as a result of that, and I'm sure that my skin will experience redness that I wouldn't otherwise get. But this is what I'm trying to tell you. It has to be right for you. It has to work for you. And I am not going to be that person that is so anxious about product and using the right thing and trying to wriggle out of every age spot that I might get in future. I would rather live, I would rather just live. And yes, I slap it on when I'm in direct sunshine. I live in a temperate, moderate climate. If you live in Australia, then you should be applying it every day. And when I was in Australia, I did. And when I'm in sunnier climes, if the heat is intense, then yes, I do have a tub of the stuff and I will apply it. And I found a technique of applying it very thinly, which is okay. It doesn't disturb me too much during the summer months, but I'm in no way religious about it at any other time of year. If I know that I'm going to be spending most of the day outdoors, then yes, I will pop a little bit on. I will dip into it here and there, but I don't do what most professionals will tell you these days, which is to wear a mask of it at all times. That just ain't me. I don't like the feeling of it, and I don't feel free with it. So feel free to ignore any piece of advice that comes your way if it doesn't bring you joy. The whole affair should be bringing you joy of some kind, or if you feel like me about it, just leave you feeling free, but as if you've got something helpful on your skin at all times, which in my case would be the active serum that I put on first thing in the morning, after a shower, and in the evening. I've got something at work on my face while I'm sleeping, just to make sure that the cells are renewing, regenerating, restoring, nurturing. And I'm not going to offer any cosmetics advice today, really. Perhaps I will in future. I don't wear a lot of cosmetics. When I dress up more draggy for you, then I will slap it on a bit more. But in general, very, very little, and oftentimes none at all when I come to you in my broadcasts. But I guess cosmetics and skincare sort of marry over when I'm talking about perfectionism. Drop perfectionism for those of you that are concerned about your skin. Because I don't know about you, but when I see a line or a wrinkle on a friend, or a crease of the eye, or a blemish or a spot, it doesn't repel me. There's something warm about seeing a hint of humanity in somebody. So I think a lot of people, especially over the last few years and with YouTube tutorials and all of this, they expect themselves to appear as some sort of editorial. They ain't models, but they're behaving as if they're walking, talking models that need to contour the hell out of their face with shadows and this, that, and the third, and appear airbrushed at all times, like a filtered sort of Instagram avatar, this kind of thing. Who really finds that attractive, It can take the warmth out of a face and the colour out of the face. What I'm suggesting is that, as with skin, one must treat it gently and not aggressively. I think it's the same with your attitude towards your skin. You should be gentle towards your visage, your face, and we can all aim to improve or get the best out of it, that particular organ that we can. But it would be folly to, and it is folly, to see people obsess over it or hold themselves to an impossible standard, because we're all human, and if people have the blessing of a long life, then as we go through the seasons, just like those leaves, we're all going to crinkle and crumple, and it behooves us to look for the beauty in all of those seasons and accept them, rather than hark back to early spring, because for most of us, early spring was past, my dear. So look at the beautiful autumn and the glorious winter and think, oh, aren't they delicious as well? You know? So I think that's enough chit-chat for now. I didn't make many notes. I probably should have done more so it was more comprehensive. But perhaps I'll pick up the topic in a future broadcast. I only really wanted to mention it just because I get so many comments very kindly asking, and I take the compliment very kindly, I really do. I'm only reluctant just because, as I say, everyone is so different and I'm not comfortable mentioning brands. So, but I do think if you are interested in skincare, then I have given some tips there which sound rather basic but that people either don't know or forget about, such as not using hot water on the face. You know, it's really simple, but just use water on your face that is room temperature so that there's no shock to it. Little things like that cumulatively make a difference. And also, once you've found the skincare brand that works for you and that you trust, using that over time and not diverging from it will also have a cumulative effect. As I say, I've been using this particular brand for about 2 years now in earnest, and it kicked off with some really good results for me. You know, within the first month I was thinking I was feeling a difference here, there and everywhere. But now, 2 years later, I'm seeing a great difference in my pores from using it over that amount of time. So it's very much about patience. It's very much about the long game and thinking about it in terms of holistically looking at your diet. But I'm the last person in the world to be disciplined enough to have a sort of perfect work-life food balance. So that's always going to arrive. But I feel when you found a skincare brand you can trust and use it as the sort of staple foundation and a routine that, you know, I don't put any thought into it. I whack it on and it's all done in a couple of minutes in the morning or less, and a couple of minutes at night. If I want to take a bit longer massaging the cleanser in, then I will, and make more of a ritual of it, and you can. But, you know, I like it to be very simple, not really think about it too heavily, and let the products do the job. Bear in mind that there's only so much that skincare can achieve, and that if you've got a real problem with, say, acne, cystic acne, or premature aging, and you want to do something about lines that skincare can't fix, then see a dermatologist, preferably one that's been recommended to you. I've never seen one, but I know of very good ones. Some of them have skincare lines, and make sure that they are of good repute, and I'm told that they are worth the money because they're not cheap. A decent one is not cheap, but they will put you on a good course, which also isn't especially cheap either, I'm afraid. But if you've got a real problem skin and it's affecting you, then you should see a professional, because there are things that can be done, and medications even that you can go on if it's that serious when it comes to acne. And if it's anti-aging treatments that you want, well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And what I've been talking about today isn't really in regard to anti-aging. Yes, hopefully good skincare will keep your skin supple and a little bit plumper in appearance and give a sort of youthful impression even when you're in your 90s. But As for anti-aging skincare, I find the whole subject a little bit icky. I would rather, if I was evolving through autumn and winter, I would rather look at surgical options if it bothered me that much, because I think you get more bang for your buck than you would out of a jar. A lot of it is about how it makes you feel, not how it makes you look. This is the thing that people forget. And, you know, I like a feeling of freshness. I like to feel fresh, clear and clean. That's my thing. Thanks for dropping in. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next broadcast. Leave me a nice juicy comment, and my tip jar is in the description box below. Thank you, and see you again soon. Toodle pip.